Through the Ted Snyder piece about how this really undermines the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is actually, I mean, frankly, if you think about it, quite so when Trump ripped up the INF treaty and the open skies, and it looked like he was going to let New START expire. Biden came in and uh, extended New START for another 5 years with Putin, but there hasn't been hardly any movement on arms control since. And now we're getting, as Ted Snyder will explain, Biden is sort of in some ways acting like Trump in the sense of this is essentially basically an unprecedented move. So he goes, this commitment is most provocative for two reasons. The first is he interviewed Frank von Hippel, a senior research physicist at Princeton, specialist in nuclear power, nuclear energy, nuclear arms, and proliferation. And he says essentially that the nuclear subs are unnecessary. These are ships that are designed for essentially offensive purposes, not defensive purposes, that conventional would have done just fine if the concern was protecting yourself from an invasion. So he says that a full 40 countries have these attack submarines, but only 5 original nuclear weapon states have nuclear powered submarines. He says Brazil and India may be planning to in the future. But he talks about how these subs, unlike the French and the Chinese, are powered by, as I said earlier, this weapons grade uranium. And so he says it pushes hard against the Non-Proliferation Treaty because the idea is in Section 4-1 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, it guarantees non-nuclear weapon states like Australia the use of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. And Article 4-2 permits the exchange of nuclear equipment for peaceful use of nuclear energy. As the first region why the agreement is so provocative is made clear, nuclear-powered submarines, they're not defensive, they're for attacking. So that's not a peaceful purpose. And he says so essentially that the way that they get around this is that in 1972 in the non-proliferation, what's called informally the submarine loophole was inserted, and it's called the non-application of safeguards to nuclear material to be used in non-peaceful activities. So, under the non-proliferation treaty, these non-nuclear weapon states are permitted to use nuclear energy for civilian, peaceful purposes, and they're under the safeguards of the IAEA's supervision. Now, under this loophole, those same states are allowed to remove nuclear materials from IAEA monitoring for any military purpose other than, quote, production of nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices, end quote, which basically means nuclear-powered submarines. So, but up until now, as Ted Snyder points out, no nuclear weapon state has invoked the submarine loophole. So, though it's not strictly a violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, von Hippel says it does undermine the non-proliferation regime. And so, as he points out, that the Non-Proliferation Treaty it allows these states to acquire nuclear-powered submarines, but it discourages other countries from providing enriched uranium for non-peaceful activities. And clearly, these are not peaceful activities. So, it's not not a direct violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but it's certainly a de facto violation in that sense. It's a violation of the spirit of it, let's say. And so, he says the U.S. Supplies the U.K. with highly enriched uranium, and he says that this von Hippel from Princeton said that he assumes the U.S. will likely supply the enriched uranium to Australia as well. So, yeah, I mean, it's just that is, it's certainly an escalation and not. I mean, the treaty is designed to prevent just these sorts of transfers.
Right. And, if another country was doing this, the U.S. reaction would be that, like, had China been given this technology to, I don't know, North Korea, of course, the United States would be absolutely ballistic about that. Just, to point out, not that that's maybe a 1-to-1 equal, because North Korea does possess their own nuclear weapons, but, just to think of what the reaction would be if Russia gave this to Iran. for example. That, I'm sure the outrage would be absolutely astronomical. What else do we have here, Connor?
Point out primarily that this is becoming a much more. I mean, the blow. I guess I was interested to find out that as we move toward this great power competition, that things are becoming much more unstable. Let's say. I mean, I was just reading this great piece from Pat Buchanan today where he points out that, as he says, regularly now, U.S. planes stationed in Alaska scramble to intercept Russian military aircraft. He goes, this year, the number of intercepts, which is up to 14 now, is on pace to set a record since the Cold War. And in the most recent case, 2 Russian bombers and 2 fighters came within 30 miles of the Alaskan coast. He says this summer, Russian naval vessels came within 34 miles of Hawaii. And he says Russian ships and planes off Alaska are perhaps responding to U.S. warships and planes in the Black Sea. And that's certainly true. We've covered that all year, how Biden has been essentially having NATO NATO has been running military drills in the Black Sea basically since Biden came into office. I mean, I believe in 2020 they were in the Black Sea for I think 82 days, like 19 down from the previous year. So they wanted to step that up and increase their presence. The Americans wanted to increase their military presence in places like the Arctic as well. So I mean, there have been quite a bit of provocations of Russia since Biden came into office. And Trump was doing much the same thing. There's obviously a continuity, but it's a continuity of escalation, it seems. And so, I'll just point out that I think that, I mean, I was surprised to see that was happening because, I mean, we're used to seeing what it's interesting, I guess, to say that I don't think the Americans are aware of how often we're running these drills and poking China and Russia right off their coast or on their borders. And we're getting into a much more serious situation. And these kinds of, deals like AUKUS, they may have a sort of a temporary, short-term political gain here at home. But I guess what I'm saying is that I think the American people need to pay more attention to exactly how fast all this can spin out of control. We're committed to, as Pat points out in the piece, to defend, the Philippines if they get into a conflict with China over the Whitsun Reef, which is part of the Spratly Islands. They have conflicting claims over the Whitsun Reef with, not only do China and the Philippines lay claim to those, but so do the Vietnamese. If you look at the Senkaku Islands, the Biden administration, again, Lloyd Austin, I think even Biden himself have, repeatedly said that we will defend Japan, that we are committed. Our security treaty covers those Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea that are also claimed by not only China and Japan, but also Taiwan. And, as Pat points out, you're looking at in the South China Sea, you've got, myriad features, rocks, islands, islets, archipelagos, and there's overlapping claims by all these different states: Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Taiwan, the Philippines, Brunei, and China as well. Of course, I mean, China has huge claims in the region. And so what the U.S. policy has been under, since Pompeo last year in July made the announcement that the Americans have virtually rejected almost all of China's claims, and we sail ships constantly throughout the region. We're always flying warplanes, it seems, and it's getting much worse under the Biden regime. I think the Chinese Defense Ministry spokesman came out in April and said that the presence I may get these two backwards, but I'm pretty sure it's that the planes are up. The presence of military planes is up 40%, warplanes that is, and the presence of warships is up 20% under Biden, and that was just in April. The South China Strategic Probing Initiative, the South China Sea Strategic Probing Initiative think tank based in Beijing that keeps track of all this stuff, was talking about how in February of this year, I believe Biden had flown more than 70 warplanes over the South China Sea near China's coast. So, and Trump was setting records doing that, 60 times a month around this time last year. So, it's getting much, much worse. And like as we've said, I don't know where we go from here, but it's looking more and more like the Americans are not interested in tamping down tensions because it's obviously beneficial for the military industrial complex. We know that going back to even the early days of the new Cold War, you had Bruce Jackson, the former vice president of Lockheed, who was I think head of the committee to expand NATO. There's a massive interest in pushing, making relations much worse between these major states, and I think that's at best case scenario. What just I guess a new Cold War where we spend ourselves into oblivion, as I think Marshall Billingsley threatened to do. It was like that was Trump's envoy on arms control, threatened to spend China and Russia into oblivion, into a new arms race. Like best case scenario, if things keep going down the road they are, that's what we would do. But it could easily spiral out of control. And anyway, it's more situations like this, I think, should be opportunities for the American people to really ask, like, why are we doing this?
Right. Well, and also we've seen from other places too, like with the Abraham Accords, right? When you sign these international agreements that are based on new weapon sales, is going to provoke other states to seek other weapons as well. And so, it may, China's the obvious, answer to saying that they're probably going to look to develop more anti-submarine technology and maybe more of their own submarines to counter Australia, but also North Korea may be interested, and also like Indonesia or another country that has an uncomfortable relationship with Australia. And so, it could cause major arms races. And then let's say China does 5 years from now, they've developed a new technology to neutralize, or at least the West says that China has developed a new technology to neutralize these submarines. Then what are we going to have to sell Australia so they maintain, or at least so from our, perspective, and this will be the rhetoric, that they maintain their edge over China, and this ability to deter China and all of that. This isn't going to be, it's always presented as, this is going to be the one shot to, like, fits the current situation, where this is actually going to exacerbate the problem, and probably quite significantly with this being nuclear related technology, and especially weapons grade nuclear related technology.